Hi, I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and we couldn't be happier to host the 4th Annual Insight Jam. I want to thank everyone who's participating this week, as well as our Insight Jam sponsors, DataStax, Monte Carlo, Denodo, High Gear, and Seller Data. I also want to thank our Solutions Review editors and staff for pulling this event together. When we started this in 2019, we wanted to take a moment at the end of the year to celebrate enterprise technology with a social media event offering best practices and predictions. This will be our biggest jam ever, including 16 live-streamed expert panel discussions over 4 days. And we intend to keep the insights flowing in 2023 with the launch of an expert subscription site for any tech professional who wants to publish posts on Solutions Review. Again, thank you all for being here and enjoy the Insight Jam.
Solutions Review presents Insight Jam, a social media celebration of enterprise technology. Hello and welcome back to the second day of the 4th Annual Insight Jam. My name is Jonathan Paula. I'm the Director of Multimedia here at Solutions Review. Today's focus is data protection, and for the next 60 minutes we've assembled another group of experts to discuss today's topic, the state of data privacy tools and practice. Excited to have everybody here. Thank you for joining me. It is a pleasure to host you. David Lotion, you've agreed to moderate today's discussion, so we're going to let you kick things off with our 60-second introductions, a bit about your background, what brings you to today's conversation, and take it away from there. I will see you all at the end of the show. Good luck.
Thanks, and I appreciate your giving me the opportunity to be the moderator here. My name is David Lotion. I am the president of Knowledge Integrity, a company that's focused on data strategy, solutions, and consulting, and I'm also, at the same time, I'm a senior faculty member at the University of Maryland's College of Information Studies. I was the program director for their Master of Information Management program, as well as focusing on external relations with organizations. And I've spent the last 3 years or so doing kind of a deep dive on data privacy laws and their impacts on data management, data security, data protection. And I'm actually currently working on a paper with folks here at Solutions Review on perspectives on data governance and data security. And I'm going to hand it off to Justin, who's immediately to my right.
Thanks, David. Thanks for having me. My name is Justin Beals. I'm the CEO and co-founder of StrikeGraph. My organization helps our customers achieve critical compliance certifications such as SOC 2 or ISO 27001. As a background, I've spent 20 years as an engineer, computer scientist, an entrepreneur, working on a number of different startups that were data-driven. It's a pleasure to join everybody today.
Sophie, why don't we go to you?
Hello, everybody. So I'm Sophie Stella-Bourdillon. I am Senior Privacy Counsel and Legal Engineer at Immuta. Immuta is a data security solution that is helping customers secure their data in the cloud in particular. So it's an access control layer. I spent 10 years in research and academia, and 3 years ago, I decided to join Immuta to contribute to the industry effort to try to help organizations of all sizes secure their data and meet data protection requirements. Very happy to be here.
Simon, why don't we go clockwise and go to you?
Sounds good. Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. My name is Simon Michaelson. I'm the field CTO for Cetera Networks, a cloud storage and cloud global file system solution provider. Been with Cetera for about 12 years now. My background is also from engineering, and we specialize in what we call providing infinite storage through a software-defined solution connected to any cloud provider to remote offices, users, and applications. And really, the conversation today about data privacy and data integrity and data protection is really near and dear to our hearts, right? So when how we see security kind of following data wherever it goes. So really excited for today's conversation.
Sophia, let's pivot to you.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Sophia Sundaram. I run products for Haiku. Haiku is HYCU, a multi-cloud data protection company based out of Boston. Very happy to be here. What we do is multi-cloud data protection, and my background, I've had the opportunity to work with lots of different customers over the many years, working for companies like EMC, Veritas, NetApp, Computer Associates, and BMC, and so on. And data is near and dear to heart for our customers, and our goal is to how to keep it safe, protected, and also compliant.
Thanks. And Dan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of DIG Security. Very happy to be here today. DIG Security is a cloud data security company. We help organizations protect data in public clouds like AWS, Azure, GCP, Snowflake, wherever data lives outside of the on-prem world. And mostly we help organizations answer three main questions. What data do we even have? How is that data being used? And of course, how do we protect that data from being exfiltrated, misused, or breached? Super happy to be here. Privacy is tightly coupled with security. So very excited for this session today.
Thanks all. That was a great introduction. And basically, it looks like we've got a full spectrum of folks with experience, with a deep experience in technology and in a horizontal perspective on data privacy and the laws that are driving that. And actually, I think I can kind of start this off with a little bit of a perspective that I would say over the last 5 years or so, there's been an acceleration of three different trends. One is a technology trend of migration to the cloud. The second is the adoption of a wide variety of either cloud native tools that are being provided by the service providers in the cloud, or open source products that have been made available through open systems. And then the third is on the other side of the spectrum is the continued concern about exposure or unauthorized access to what we'll call sensitive data. I think I'm going to make that a little broader. That is kind of motivated a large number of governmental jurisdictions to implement and enforce data privacy laws. And so I think I want to start from there. Given that context, what do you guys see as the biggest challenges that are emerging from this? And I'm going to estimate approximately 100 different jurisdictional data privacy laws that are driving the need for cloud data protection. And I think I'm going to jump to Simon to give us start us off on that one.
Of course. So thank you, David. I think if we roll back the clock and look at some of the things that happened over the past few years, kind of going back to 2020 with, as an example, the US and EU Privacy Shield was deemed as invalid, also known as Schrems 2. It put really strict guidelines to how data can be stored, processed, or even accessed, and by whom. So it puts a lot of organizations in that very tough situations at how do they change their data protection landscape so it kind of fits that new model. And not only that, we saw this also happening with the social media platforms, what's called the right to be forgotten, right? The right to be deleted from your databases. So we do know that those those countries are working on a new transatlantic type of data privacy framework. But I think cloud data protection data privacy presents an opportunity to address these challenges, especially because it provides compute and storage in so many different jurisdictions today. So in terms of opportunity, we have those infrastructures available to us, and coupled with the right solution, we can help guarantee the data is sent to the right place, and it's also kind of being processed and accessed by the right individuals. So anything that carries kind of regulatory constraints or subject to data privacy laws, we have better tools today to kind of address those different ever-changing landscape, if you will, for data protection laws.
So I'm going to press pause on that for a second, because I want to go back to something that it sounded like you were referring to. Sophia, I know that you guys in your company have invested a lot of time in doing an investigation of the criteria associated with different data privacy laws. Can you talk a little bit about the externally facing perspective on these challenges that are emerging from data privacy? And I guess also your location indicates you might have some expertise in GDPR, which is probably the biggest driver of data privacy currently.
Yes, of course. So no, I think I would agree with Simon. Data transfers is a key concern of our customers. How to make sure we're able to comply with transfer restriction, localize the data, and then make the claim that we are compliant. As we know, the biggest cloud providers are not necessarily established in restrictive jurisdictions, so that the European Union, and they have maintenance teams as well as sitting in third countries. So, and And often it's not enough to claim that the data is stored in one jurisdiction to then be able to be fully compliant. So you need additional measures to be able to claim compliance. This is not very easy to identify. We've been looking at guidance from different regulators. There is not necessarily agreement on the effect of different types of masking techniques, segmentation techniques as well, data sharing techniques as well. So there is clearly a need for more clarity here. But this being said, what we've seen is that there is still best practice on the ground. So minimizing data is the key. Working with data natively is also one key best practice.
Thanks. I think Justin, I was doing a little review of some of the material that's on your company's website, and I think your perspective kind of straddles the fence between the external facing and the technological. And Sophia, I'm going to come to you in a minute, but Justin, what's your perspective on some of these challenges?
Yeah, I think one thing that we learned in working in compliance broadly is that there are two types of compliance motions from organizations. One is certainly a liability concern. We have customers in Europe. We are storing European data. There is no safe harbor law between the United States and Europe, and therefore we need to store this data in a European data center. If we don't, we are liable to be sued or prosecuted in certain jurisdictions. But there's another issue going here, and it's actually growing faster than the concern over the liability. And that's where data privacy and the security you implement to perform data privacy is part of a sales asset, where essentially you're not going to get a B2B buyer deal unless you have implemented security practices that speak to how you keep data private. And this has been a faster growing concern because the difference between being sued 3 to 5 years down the road versus not getting a deal today is motivating companies to get through security standards that resolve some of these data privacy questions and achieve certification. So I think that we kind of differentiate between a liability outcome that you're working towards and a sales asset that you need to find compliance with right away. And then I would say data privacy and security are tightly linked. The motivation is to keep data private. The resolution is to implement security practices that help you keep data private. And we certainly help our customers scope the exact right fit to security practices that keep data private.
Sophia, thanks, Justin. Sophia, your background reflects a large amount of focus on, I would say, the computational and operational aspects on the implementation side. Perspectives on these questions about data privacy laws and how that's propagated through the back ends.
Totally, David. I mean, I could think. Now I'm going to come from a totally different dimension of the challenges customers are facing in this area, right? A big problem which we hear from a lot of customers is the number of places where their data is. I mean, one is, right, I mean, they think it's not in one location right now. I mean, people originally used to think in single data centers and multiple data centers, and now, one cloud and then multiple clouds. It is just not that. It's the number of SaaS applications they choose to, right? That just explodes. That creates a totally different set of problem. It's like, because when data was all in one place, so much more easier. Now, and they say an average company has more than 150 data silos. When they talk about data silos, these are production data in there. That causes a completely different scale of problem for customers. That is something which I think we need to address it, and that's something I think we want to definitely bring up as a challenge for customers.
So that actually dovetails with something that Simon said before when he made a reference to the right to be forgotten. And I think one of the biggest issues with the right to be forgotten is exactly what you just said, which is it's not a question of simply turning off a switch and eliminating access to a data subject's record. It's because if you've got 150 silos across the enterprise, how do you even know where that individual's data is? And Sophie, this also touches upon something you said about masking and other aspects. So Dan, I'm going to go to you. What are some of the ways that an organization can address that particular, that's a particularly sticky kind of problem, but I think it's one that you might have some insights into.
Of course. So I completely agree with everyone that essentially spoke before me. Typically, customer data sits today in 5 main locations: endpoint, email, on-prem, SaaS, and public cloud. And most large enterprises today run across multiple clouds and across multiple different types of data stores: structured data stores, semi-structured data stores, unstructured data stores. So completely the challenge is there. But most of the enterprises today that at least we work with just lack the visibility to understanding what data they even own. And that's exactly ties to what Sofia's answer essentially provided earlier. There's just too many different types of data store technologies, too many different types of clouds, and most of these organizations just lack the visibility. So the first thing that all of these organizations need to do is to map out where do they have data across the organization, across the different silos, across the different SaaS applications, across the different clouds. And that's a big project by itself. Later on, classify it, understand what ties to specific user data stores. And later on, how do you implement DSAR requests? How do you implement proper security controls? How do you implement proper authorization to where you have sensitive data? But the problem originates much earlier. First off, mapping and understanding what data you own. Where do you have customer data? Where do you have sensitive data? And where are kind of your crown jewels that might lead to a data breach later on and put you in much bigger legal risk?
I think that kind of touches upon some of those key issues. One of the things that you're referring to here is that there's a significant difference in the landscape today, and this kind of also goes with what Sophia said about multiple silos, but it's not just in the cloud. It's not just in one cloud provider. Lots of data remains on-prem, and then with this adoption of these software as a service services that have become ingrained, there's data that's living in a wide spread perspective across a number of different platforms. Now, in the past, kind of the key to data protection had been perimeter security, which was setting up a chain link fence with sentries along the edge to keep people from getting in. How does data protection today differ from this traditional data security? And Justin, I think I'm going to jump to you to start that one off.
Yeah. So interesting statistic that I learned around this as we were researching security compliance and certification. About approximately 70% of data breaches are coming from third-party vendors at most enterprises. So that the vast number of data privacy issues are coming from a single source, vendor management. And that's why, I think the perimeter, trying to identify a lockdown perimeter, and certainly when I started in computer science as a professional, that was the idea, that we're going to lock every API down very securely and we'll be able to control that. But with the fluidity that happens in a SaaS environment and small teams picking up new tools on their own, and of course, the products that get sold in the marketplace want that to be an easy way to work with that new product. So they're designed to allow data to move more fluidly. And so this is where we've seen a big growth in our business, is that enterprises are literally requiring every vendor that they work with or share data that they have to meet an independently verified security compliance practice, so that they can feel comfortable sharing that data back and forth with that vendor. And it's grown massively for us, and the standards like SOC 2 and ISO 27001, and certainly we're starting to see testing on things like GDPR, like can we test you to ensure compliance to the practice that you specify, as a precursor to a relationship. Not something that we kind of expect you to do over time or you claim but weren't tested on, but literally an independent verification before you ever start working with us. I think that's the big shift that we're certainly seeing. I think we've accepted that there's a certain amount of data fluidity. When we describe our marketplace, we say any B2B company that shares data is essentially going to get hit with one of these compliance requirements.
Again, I think you've hit upon a number of key points. There's one that I think I want to drill down into with Simon. You mentioned, Justin, about that a large number of the breaches are actually coming from vendor products, and one of the trends that I referred to earlier was about the explosion of use of open source tools. And Simon, how does that create an increased risk to breaches through the traditional security, and how do you address that internally with different types of data protection techniques?
Right. So this is a great question, David. I think lots of organizations today see open source as an opportunity, which it is, to perhaps move faster, be able to generate value at a very quick pace. And vendors see that as well. But then the reality is that you can have multiple different vendor products that leverage different types of open source tools, and then kind of applying a security umbrella on top of it is very difficult. You end up with this kind of wild west of tools and capabilities and all kinds of vulnerabilities. So you really have to first, I think, as an organization, have a strict policy towards security. And we see a lot of those organizations moving from perimeter security to zero trust. And then requiring that type of model, and then in a way demanding that from any vendor product can help in terms of just the philosophy itself, to make sure that there's not only security as against external threats, but also from inbound within your intranet, and maybe preventing them from proliferating within your network. But some of those techniques that you ask about, what are those some methodologies could be? We see those continuous scanning, of course, for open source products and vendor products for vulnerability assessments. We see security applied at the very beginning of the development, in the methodology of the developers and the way they embrace tools. And then finally, the concepts that the tools kind of deploy within the environment, they introduce authentication and authorization between every single pair of nodes, if you will. And when I mention zero trust, it's a philosophy that kind of gets implemented beyond data. It touches users, it touches devices, the network, and even visibility and forensics, like Dan was mentioning before. And I think just to touch on kind of maybe a little bit on the previous question, some of the techniques that we, for example, use at Cetera to ensure that the security follows data is provide things like mapping between data sets and their locality. This way we provide kind of users and applications that fabric that no matter where they put the data, IT has already defined those policies where data gets routed. It could be based on sensitivity of the data. It could be based on sovereign and jurisdiction requirements, things of that nature. And of course, like Sophia mentioned, the ability to kind of permanent delete, identify and delete all the copies and snapshots of a previous data set. So I think these are kind of some of the concepts, the tools, organizations are going to need today to cope with those threats.
Dan, it sounds like one of the things that Simon is referring to is that it's almost a combination that perimeter security of 10 years ago has to be augmented with what you were referring to earlier, which I'm going to reframe as data awareness and knowledge of essentially of what is the landscape and what are the data assets and where are they, and Sophia, I think you kind of mentioned some aspects of this as well, which is the wide variety of distribution. And Dan, how do you blend these intelligence activities or surveillance into the landscape and map that accordingly with the traditional perimeter security? How does that actually work?
Mm-hmm. That's a fantastic question. So first off, we actually call it DataCentric Security, that it's essentially starts from the data outwards. And that's essentially one of the biggest trends that now we're seeing in the markets. Gartner sees it as kind of the top 8 trends of 2023 in cybersecurity. Now, initially, after you mapped the different types of data stores, the different types of data assets, let's focus only on the cloud just for this discussion. You need to understand what are activities that should never happen with data. We call this DDR, data detection and response, where you need to essentially track and identify what activities should never happen. A developer should never download a production database to their personal machine. Data should not be copied outside of your production account to a foreign account that doesn't belong to the organization. You shouldn't have mass downloads, mass uploads, where if a machine never touches sensitive data and now it's touching a lot of it, you're in a problem. So implementing DLP-like capabilities for the public cloud is super important. But the problem there is fragmentation. Cloud-native solutions just don't scale to that option. Macy only does buckets. Google DLP only does BigQuery and buckets. Azure Purview is a very difficult product. I come from Microsoft. So you need to have a multi-cloud security solution, multi-cloud data security solution that will help you kind of, first off, understand your data, understand how it's being used, minimize static risk, but also minimize real-time data risk, which is DDR today or DLP for cloud. At least that's how we look at this space.
As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, and Sophia, do you want to add something to that? Yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely. I want to add to what Dan was saying. I mean, one is looking at the data and analyzing who can access and what level of access and so on. I want to even take a step back and look at the basics, right? What I'm going to tell is probably not any rocket science, but an important thing sometimes people miss is the number of, it goes back to what we said earlier, lots of data silos. The only thing to do is to make sure the first basic thing, the perimeter security was great when you had data within a certain domain of control, very clear, right? With the number of the data spreading across lots of different places, the only way for a customer to be able to any organization to be able to manage is to have a security system which allows them to lock at every point. Something like an Okta, something like Dig Security, things like that, which allows you to protect at every place. That's the only way to scale. You have to actually have a system which actually does it, number one, right? Number two, access control, right? This just goes back to, it's probably even a primitive earlier than what Dan mentioned, but that's a basic, those are basic principles, I would say. First, do you have the global control of your, essentially lock at every door, right? Lock at every door. When somebody enters, do you know who's entering? That's there. Then it comes to the next level of understanding data and the exact privileges, things like that. So there is one step, even earlier, I think, sounds basic, but I think it's critical.
No, absolutely. And I think one of the things that you're reinforcing is that, it's not just locking the door, it's also knowing who came through. And I think Simon also referred to this, that you can't ignore internal risks. So you've got your folks who you've already vetted somehow, and they still may be sitting inside your firewall, but still may be information risks. And there's one other aspect which you guys kind of referred to, and I'm not even sure if you recognize that you referred to it. But Sophia, I'm going to see if you can provide some insight into this, which is not human interactors with your environment, but automated agents. So, for example, we just succumbed to the push for having some home automations. We've got an Alexa. We've got a bunch of light bulbs that have Wi-Fi connected. So here's the question: is there anything embedded? I mean, clearly there's got to be some software that's sitting inside these devices, and are we creating information risks that are opening up pathways for breaches when we adopt these a variety of different automated devices, and just kind of click on the accept the terms of use without really understanding the degree to which the vendor who has put that item together has verified that they comply with all of the different rules, and allow you to create a kind of a breach pathway.
Absolutely. So I think I would insist one more time that perimeter security is clearly not sufficient. So you were allowed to build barriers to control traffic coming in and out of a network. You also need to check what's happening within the perimeter to understand whether data is being misused and understand insider threat, therefore. And so data protection has some very interesting controls that should inform and complement traditional security practices. Minimization is key, and understanding purposes for which data is being processed is also key. So it can work relatively well when you've got humans in the loop. They have job tasks. They have needs to know when you implement the zero trust architecture paradigm or the least privilege principle that was talked about earlier. It's much easier when it's a human. You can define the data needs, and then you set up the granular access control policy for that human. When you've got agents in the mix, then suddenly the picture gets more blurry. You need to be at a higher level of abstraction and understand use cases for which the agent is meant to use the data, which requires an even more comprehensive and granular data mapping that was talked about earlier.
Thanks. That kind of does lead into another question, and I think this is kind of triggered based on something
Dan,
that.
Dan, can I just add one more?
Oh yeah, no, go ahead.
You were saying to the prior point you were talking about, right? One of the things which I think sometimes, bring your own device. The BYOD is a very popular thing in enterprise these days, and people talk about, oh, everybody does it, right? Companies think it's offloading it. The challenge with lots of consumer devices coming into the company causes a lot more problem for data privacy. People say, what does it mean? For example, a lot of the things like we talk about Alexa and this, they were typically meant for consumers. When they were meant for consumers, you accept a lot of the terms and conditions. But in an enterprise, it's also capturing we have a lot of conversations, things like that around the enterprise, right? All of them, data is being captured and a lot of things are there. Today, there's no easy way. Lots of data is going out before even the organization realize. That is something, I don't think there is an easy answer, but something for customers to actually, as they bring in the consumer devices into the organization, they got to put enough controls and see what is allowed and what's not allowed, because indirectly touches the data privacy in a very different way.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that organizations need to have a much better visibility into their vulnerability surface. Absolutely. Because it gets poked with devices that individuals are augmenting themselves automatically without even thinking about what the risks might be.
Absolutely.
A few of you guys made a reference to kind of differentiating between certain types of data that are that require protection, and I actually referred to that earlier when I talked about sensitive data as opposed to just private data. One of the reasons I say that is that having kind of investigated or done some deep reading on the differences between some of the laws like GDPR or the earlier California law, the CCPA, or the revisions in CPRA, and the other laws. They're using different words, they're using different terms, they're using different phrases, they're using different definitions. Some of them are much more explicit in what they're including and what they're not including. And then when we start thinking about this, there's all sorts of other information that while it's not protected by a data privacy law, we probably don't want our competitors to be poking into our employment information to figure out how much we're paying our key employees. How are organizations classifying and differentiating between different types of data that need to be protected? And Dan, I think you made reference to this. So I'm going to start with you on this one.
Mm-hmm. So I think, firstly, most of the organizations need to understand the different types of sensitive data that they own. It's based on region. It's based on specific industries. For example, healthcare companies need to cope with HIPAA, or financial industries need to cope with PCI. So all of these organizations need to, of course, understand what kind of data they own, where's the sensitive information, how it's being handled, and how it's being protected. In some scenarios, you also have compliance regulations that mandate that as well. For example, in HIPAA, you need to have certain controls. For PCI, you need to have certain controls as well. So that's kind of an important factor there. But typically, when we kind of understand that we own and process sensitive data, we need to understand that at least we're able to kind of log and understand why do we keep these types of controls? How is that data moving inside the organization? And also, is it being kind of stored in the right locations? It's very, very easy to store data in the wrong locations in the cloud. You click a button, you already have a VM in Asia, or you have a VM in Brazil, you have a VM in India, or you have a VM in Europe. And that kind of might violate your existing controls today. So I always make sure to map with our customers what are the compliance regulations that they're mandated for, what sensitive information they think that they have. Then, of course, we'll show them. But then, of course, how do we essentially protect them based on the different compliance standards that they need to essentially comply with?
Yeah, Justin, I'm going to go to you to follow up on that. I think one of the challenges with this classification, because of the different laws, is that now all of a sudden I've got one piece of information, but I don't know, which law it's subject to and under what context, in which, and Dan, you made reference to, essentially the sovereignty. Sometimes the data is sitting in the wrong location. How do you manage this when you've got, multiple data privacy laws that are just piled on top of other laws that have existed for decades? Like, in the US, you got the Privacy Act of 1974. I mean, it's been around for 50 years. Yeah. So this is not something new, but the fact is that with this whole litany of different characteristics of these laws, how can you ever use any of your data?
I think it's a real arms race, David. And I don't know any organization that is 100% buttoned down, no matter how big or how much they spend on it at the end of the day, right? Like, spade a spade, you're not going to be able to meet every law in every country that you're engaged in. It's not very possible. You can implement kind of effective practices, try and keep them simple so that the gray matter of the organization, all the people and how they behave, have a good understanding of what data they're working with and what might be an issue or a problem. That's probably, I like to say the one common denominator in all of this work is actually not the technology or even the data, it's the people that have to operate with it. And so if you can start foundationally with trying to create a good understanding in your organization about data and why it's sensitive, I think that's really valuable. As we talked about classification, we tend to advise our customers that are working on a security posture to meet privacy laws broadly as thinking about what is private data. So this might be information that's in a production database. That is the crown jewel, as Dan mentioned, and you've got to be super sensitive with that. What is sensitive data? This might be salary information. You don't want it to leak, but it's not going to cause a huge liability issue, more than likely. And then also we recommend identifying what data you want to keep public. If you're working towards saying this is data that we are putting on our website, this is data that we do want to launch public, it actually provides another aspect to that. What is data? How do we use it? And how do we classify it for the teams that are really helpful? One final note from a privacy perspective, we're really pleased with the new ISO 27701 standard around privacy. It's a great umbrella standard for data privacy implementation. We've found it covers GDPR, California consumer privacy, and some of the other expectations really well. And so some of our customers have utilized that. I think it was just launched in the last 3 to 4 months, and it's been a great tool for our customers.
Subhaya, you want to add
Yeah,
something?
I want to add one thing, David, to what Justin and Dan were talking. I know they were talking explicitly from the data, things like that. One other thing I want to add to that is purely from where the customer keeps the data. It's actually where, at the end of the day, if you think about it, there are copies, not just the production data, there are copies of data kept in backup and disaster recovery, things like that. It's also in different other applications outside of the organization. A big thing for the customer, what we always recommend to customers is that try to keep the data within your control, meaning as soon as you give the data to some other organization, you're inheriting their risk too. Well, that's there. So, and also not only that, they don't know always your policies. So a big part is that as the folks were talking about, there's tremendous amount of organization putting processes and things in place to keep the data safe. Now, if you start including other people, it becomes a lot more complicated. So try to keep the data within your control. Even when you go to public clouds, try to keep it within your purview rather than expecting somebody else is going to take care. That's a big part. And the copies of data, not just the production data, it's also the copies of data. It's significant.
Thanks. This makes me want to jump to a different question. And Sophie, I'm going to start with you. Compliance seems to be kind of the key word in that last iteration. How does a need for auditable compliance with data privacy alter the cloud data landscape?
So if you agree that the cloud landscape is a patchwork or is made up of different layers, there is the storage layer, the compute layer, and at Immuta we add the policy layer, then that creates a very complex environment. Auditable compliance means that you're able to understand where your data is, where it's flowing to, how it's being consumed, and how its access and usage is being restricted. And so creating the big picture, I mean, we've been talking about it quite extensively today, and enforcing rules on the data is a huge challenge. If you can do that, then you are in a very good place to be able to demonstrate some level of compliance. So auditable compliance is putting pressure on the cloud providers, that's for sure, to enhance their level of transparency. But we are not there yet exactly, because that's very resource intensive to be able to dissect all the data movements. And it's particularly hard for those who are trying to create federated data architectures. You must have heard about the data mesh concept, and therefore share data governance responsibilities across teams. So what is a must-have at the end of the day? It's a solution that supports the creation of a single source of truth, and also enable collaboration across teams to make it to be able to understand what's happening to the data and how to confine usage and access to the data.
Thanks, Simon. I see your screen went blank. Are you still there? Are you still able to respond? Okay, maybe we'll pivot back to him in a minute. Sophia, I'm kind of curious about your perspective on this question. I mean, you did point out about the diversity and the distribution of data. Thoughts about what the cloud data landscape is going to look like as we integrate data privacy into our engineering?
Totally. I mean, I think the way I'm probably too simplistic in this thing, the way I think it's a crawl, walk, run thing. A big part for me is that are we at a minimum tracking every access to the data source? That's the first step. That's the first thing for the customers. And the second thing is that when people access the data, one of the big things I always tell is never let, like similar to what Dan was mentioning, never let them download things like that. That's part of there. But even when you access it, try to use as much as possible API-based access rather than anything else. The reason I think of API-based access, I love that, is you can insert auditability in that, tracking, logging in that particular one, because that's the only method of that. Things like that, simple stuff, you do that early on, at least it starts tracking. Does it get you to the level of thing what Sophie talked about? That is the next maturity in my mind, but you got to start with the basics first and then get to the next level of maturity. That's something I would probably say.
Simon, welcome back. I was going to go to you. Were you able to hear Sophie's and Sophia's response? Because I'm going to ask for your perspective as well on the emerging cloud data landscape and its interoperability with auditable compliance. Okay.
David, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yes, so I did hear the question, and apologies, I was subject to a Windows update just now. So with regards to the question about auditable compliance and some of the elements we're seeing as it pertains to the cloud data landscape, so that, you know, as we work with customers, we kind of boil it down to like three streams that are associated with the data that's under management. It could be their data, their metadata, and one of the most important aspects is the audit stream, which in a distributed environment, you can have a combination of audit information that gets collected on premise or different cloud providers. So having that central place for visibility around any access done by any user or application within your environment is absolutely critical to start and establishing those different policies. And we've seen kind of two approaches, the bottom down and the top down approach. But having that centralized place where you can have all the audit information, you can start then deducing some tags for the type of data that's under management and use that for, of course, data privacy and security, but then also it presents some opportunities in terms of data management and where data gets stored. You can decide to manage certain data sets, perhaps based on cost considerations. But auditing, forensics, and visibility is really top of mind. And some of the techniques we use at Cetera is to aggregate all that audit information across a distributed environment to be able to provide that central point of visibility for IT professionals to start understanding the data that's under management and how they can better service their users and their customers, and overall improve their security posture.
Thanks. So in just a short amount of time, we're going to get to the end and give you guys a little bit of time to do a wrap up. But I think I got one more lightning round question for you folks. And Dan, I'm going to start with you. For the attendees and the people who are watching us right now, who are thinking, okay, I've got a lot of things I need to do. What are the tools that they need to use to supplement data governance for data privacy and data protection?
Question. So first off, I would focus on where the largest data growth is in the organization today. I mean, if you're completely on-prem, focus on a solution on-prem. If you're transitioning into the cloud and that's kind of at accelerated pace, I would focus on cloud security solutions, the cloud data security solutions. Now, focusing on cloud data security, it depends if you're running single cloud and multi-cloud. If you want to start easy, you can start with the cloud native solutions. But if you want kind of a full solution in this specific space, you can go to a DSPM solution, to data protection solution, a data security solution like Dig Security, and essentially try to map those out. Now, I always say that in information protection, you need kind of three main tools: privacy, governance, and security. And all solutions kind of do two out of the three instead of the three. We focus on security and compliance, others do privacy. So I would focus on understanding what are your different needs. But again, first, everything starts with visibility, then mapping out the actual process, understanding that you have people inside the organization that will also champion this with you. Because if you're trying to do this from kind of a siloed team that is going to try and wrap the entire organization with the proper visibility, it's going to be super hard. You need the involvement of the business units. They know their data better than you. So mapping out the actual location where you want to start, mapping out the process, and recruiting champions, that's, in my opinion, kind of the number one thing.
Great, thanks. Justin, let's go to you. Lightning round.
I have a slightly different take on it. I think that you start providing a roadmap for privacy, security, compliance, depending on where you sell your product. It has almost nothing, in my mind, to do with the type of data you keep, but who you sell your product to. So if you are a health tech product, you are selling in the United States, what's nice about understanding what the scope of your data privacy issues are going to be is that there are standards out there that will tell you how to test the relative level of privacy you've implemented. And I for one, don't enjoy going back to the days where we said, if you didn't have a data breach, you spent enough money on security and privacy. And if you did, then you didn't. I much prefer utilizing some of the standards and rubrics that are out there to get an independent assessment of actual practices in the organization that speak to the concern for privacy and security. So this is also very bottom up from an enterprise perspective, because each different division that's selling a product is going to have a different thing that they are selling to a different group of people. They're going to have different compliance issues. And so you can almost use the business as a directive to where to go.
Sophie, let's jump to you. Again, tools. What are the tools that are supplementing the data governance required for data privacy?
So at Immuta, we work with organizations building data science environments. And so we distinguish between three types of data-related risks. Risk to the data, information leakage, risk from the data, discrimination, bias, and risk with the data, data misuse. And so what we say to our customer that for these three types of risks, then you need to have tools to mitigate these and prevent these. And so to start with, which is the very starting point, risk to the data, information leakage. Here, the main tool is obviously access control. You need to be able to discover the data, to detect suspicious events, and above all, enforce policies to ensure that your consumers are accessing only what they need to access. Because again, I'm going to insist on that data minimization is the best way to prevent unauthorized access. Risk from the data, you've got tools to detect and mitigate bias and eliminate errors. And then finally, risk with the data, data misuse. Here, we are back actually to access control, which will help you implement data minimization and purpose limitation. We are very strong on purpose at Immuta because that's the best way to implement the least privilege principle, so best security practices. And you should also have a tool to ensure unlinkability across processing activities to make sure, again, you prevent unauthorized use of your data. But just to finish, the toolbox is not everything. The people is also the core. So you need to have an interdisciplinary team working together. So don't forget the people.
Sophia, let's jump to you. Thoughts?
So the good thing is that, so as Justin and Sophie were talking about, at the end of the day, it's people are the critical element there, right? So one of the challenges which I see in a lot of organizations is that they come up with very complicated set of criteria for what to do and things like that. It's all good, but unless it's easy for people to understand, people will make mistakes. So the big thing is that if you can simplify the set of guidelines, first set it up, please, and get the people across the board trained, not just only the people managing who control the access to the data, but all of the people, including the people running infrastructure, get them to learn that thing. It is extremely important because if you do that, everybody will be conscious about that. That's the only way to get at scale in the organization. That's the first part. Obviously, you have specialized in that particular one. You will actually do that, but let's focus on the first thing. That's an important thing. That way, every team, every organization, people being infrastructure, application, database people, everybody will be thinking about this.
Simon, I think you're the one who has not provided your input yet. Why don't we go to you?
Sounds good. Yeah. So I think one of the key things that was mentioned here is, is about people. I'll maybe provide kind of a different angle, additional supplemental angle to this is that, people could be very challenging to scale. And one of the things we have been seeing is that a lot of these breaches and issues with data privacy are also around misconfigurations. And what we find to be very effective is this transition towards infrastructure as code and implementing automation orchestration tools. So once you have those policies in place, from like Justin mentioned about looking at who's your customer, what regulations you're subject to, implementing that in a way that's consistent across the board is really key. It provides predictability and understanding of your security posture. The second thing that we're also seeing with our clients is that anomaly detection. Being able to kind of classify everything could be a very challenging task. So leveraging solutions out there that could really learn about how our business operates and then try to tell us or alert in the event that we identify something that's abnormal, unusual, could help us, kind of point us to what's next and how can we further improve. So these are the two things I would recommend to look at. Thank you.
Thanks, all.
Yes, thank you all indeed. That was a great panel. Appreciate your time and expertise for the last 54 minutes here. But it is time to wrap up, so I'd love to prompt each of you for some self-promo, whether you want to promote a book, your Twitter account, or your company solution. The floor is yours. David, you moderated, so we'll let you go last. Justin, let's start with you. And your mic is muted.
Yeah, thanks. So happy to talk a little bit about StrikeGraph, my company, and what we do. We are a compliance orchestration and certification platform. So we help our companies and customers design a security posture that meets common standards in the marketplace. Today, we support SOC 2, ISO 27001, ISO 27701, PCI DSS, HIPAA, GDPR, California Consumer Privacy, and we just launched the CMMC, the NIST 800-153 standard. We help them distribute responsibility for those operations across their organization, and we automate the collection of evidence via APIs to gather the proof that you've been operating that security posture. And finally, and most importantly, we have a very powerful assessments team that provides the sales assets you need to accelerate revenue and trust, from penetration testing to SOC 2 audits to common certifications like HIPAA. We're kind of a full life cycle shop.
Excellent. Thank you, Justin. Sophie. I think she may have frozen. We'll come back to her. Dan,
Quickly,
how about... never mind. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll be quick. So at Immuta, we help our customers to build data protection by design, data architectures. We've got a variety of controls that we can apply on the data from day one. And in particular, we've got a very wide range of access control techniques, such as masking techniques and PETs as well, built into the products. We spoke extensively about the complexity of these frameworks. At Immuta, we believe that there is the possibility to build a uniform data protection grammar. So if there is one thing that I'd like to share is our data protection white paper, where we explain that it's actually possible to create an environment that is consistent with a variety of frameworks. And here again, I'll go back to data classification, which is actually the core. The ability to distinguish between identifiers and sensitive attributes brings you very far on the road if you're able to do that. So yeah, data protection grammar from Immuta. Do
Excellent.
check.
Thank you very much. Dan, 30 seconds or so.
Hi, everyone. I'm here to, of course, promote Dig Security, my newest startup. Dig Security is a cloud data security company. We help organizations protect data in public clouds like AWS, Azure, GCP, and Snowflake. We initially help organizations discover what data they own across different types of data stores automatically. No, tell us where your data stores are, and then we'll classify it. That's weird. And then we bring context to the actual data. How is the data being used by whom, and how is it flowing? And then, of course, we protect it. We have a DDR engine, data detection and response capabilities, that help keep your data in your clouds and not exfiltrated. Think about DLP for cloud. Check us out. Thanks.
Thank you. You're very welcome. Subaya.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. My name is Subaya, and at Haiku, HYCU, what we do is multi-cloud data protection. I know a lot of people, when they think of data protection, they think of data security, but we actually, what our company does for customers is backup and recovery, migration, and disaster recovery. The key things we do for customers is to make sure your data is safe, and we keep multiple copies of your data outside of your production. We try to make sure they're immutable, because that way, even if some bad actor comes in, it is safe. That is something we do. And we make sure it's available when you need it, where you need it, across any cloud, be it AWS, Google, Azure, your on-prem VMware, or any SaaS infrastructure you actually have. So that is something which we do for customers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Simon, 30 seconds or less.
Thank you. So Satera is a global file system solution provider. We provide a multi-petabyte global namespace that supports unstructured data across any number of sites today. We present data storage to users and applications, and we help create that single repository for data storage. We're the only DoD-approved product out there for within our space. So a lot of the philosophies we discussed today about data privacy, zero trust, are embedded within our solution. So security is a huge emphasis for us as it kind of goes with data. I would encourage everyone listening in to join us for our webinar on Thursday, where we are going to announce Satera 7.5. That's our latest product release. And you'll be able to kind of get more face time with our experts and learn a little bit more about the kind of security aspects of our solution and how we help organizations across verticals such as healthcare, manufacturing, financial services, agriculture, and more. Thank you.
Jonathan, you're muted.
John,
It happens to everybody. Regretfully, David, we'll have to. We won't get to you tonight, but thank you again, all of you, for your attention and your expertise today. And David, thank you for moderating. We hope to see you right back here in just a few short seconds for our next panel, the evolution of data storage, past, present, and future. Thank you again for watching. See you next time.